Good morning, everybody.
Morning.
Hey there.
Good morning. This is Nick. I'm not feeling well today, so I'm not going to show you my sick face.
Oh, no.
I'm sorry, Nick.
Um,
The face you're showing looks good.
Thank you, sir.
and hey, everybody, for those who haven't met me, I'm Cassandra Ferris. I'm the community manager here at SaltStack. So, and I probably see my name popping up in Slack and stuff, but trying to put names and faces together.
So, Nick, who's driving? Are you driving or am I driving? You don't sound so hot. If you want, I can start driving.
Yeah, I think the only reason that I'm talking right now is because my wife threw tea at me with honey in it, so that's helping. But yeah, if somebody else wants to talk, that would be spectacular.
Someone who
All
knows
right.
what they're doing, preferably, because that's not me.
Okay, well, I'll start talking then. So here we go. We announced a bunch of things at SaltConf, particularly around cloud, and we had some good initial traction with the cloud working group and a number of the initiatives that we're working on at the moment, particularly around item and trying to get some of that off the ground. We answered a lot of questions back there. One of the things that I wanted to highlight today is that back at SaltConf, I did tell everybody that I would start working on an encrypted at rest secret store. Now, the encrypted at rest secret store that I've got is, how do I put this? It works. I wouldn't call it user-friendly quite yet. Very, very early on, but this is definitely something that we need to make sure that we have for being able to, well, store stuff that we need for cloud activities. And so it is up and available. It is called Takara. It's got a very, again, I wouldn't call it ready for prime time. There's a lot of work that still needs to be done.
May I ask why that's the name? I'm just not familiar with that term.
Takara is Japanese for the word treasure. Took me a while to figure out a name. That was
Let me ask, is anyone taking minutes?
I am.
Okay,
Yeah,
just wanted to
we're
make sure in
recording
case. Just want to make sure, well, yeah, just want to make sure someone's capturing it because in the past we were updating the minutes and I've just found it's been a little difficult to follow. So thanks.
Okay. On my end, that's really the only thing that I've got. Let me give a brief introduction to what I'm trying to put together here. Now, when it comes to secret storage, the challenge that we run into is that we generally end up in this situation where to set up a secret store, it takes a fair amount of effort. They're fairly complex, and oftentimes we just want to get something up and off the ground so that we can have encrypted credentials. Now, my goal around this project, which has already been merged into item, but I haven't gotten that release out quite yet. But the goal of this project is to make it so that it's very, very easy to be able to define encrypted secrets locally so that you can just get the ball rolling, but that we will be able to progress that secret store into being something which is a robust network API accessible system. So that instead of saying that we've got to get something off the ground, therefore we need to set up a dedicated service, we can easily embed secret storage into existing applications or be able to run that system standalone. So Give me a second here and I'll share my screen and I'll go over a little bit of where we're at with this. Again, I've already said this, it's a little early. I will share a terminal. So I'm debating the best way to take care of this. So again, this has been pushed up to PyPy, but I was trying to get at least something out yesterday preparatory to this meeting. I still need to finish up documentation and a few other things. So consider this an extremely early preview. All right. The README is basically where we're at with documentation so far, but how this works is that Takara abstracts a hierarchical namespace which can store arbitrary data. And so it can store files or strings in specific paths. Using it is intended to be very simple. All you've got to do is install Takara, run Takara create. Takara has the ability to seal the data in numerous different ways. By numerous, at this point, I mean 2. But of course, it's pluggable, so it's easy to add new mechanisms for sealing encrypted data. When you create a new system, you create a unit. Takara allows you to have numerous units, which can have different storage backends or different encryption or access mechanisms. And so if we just say Takara create, it will create a unit called main with a password. It'll prompt you for a password to seal the secret store. Then setting a value in the secret store is as easy as calling Takara set. We give it a path where the value is going to be, and then either a string or a file. And then we can get that secret back out. So again, very simple, very straightforward so far. Since it is also built on top of POP, it's already been app merged into item. And so what that means is that we do have the ability to directly call Takara from within item so that we can start up an item execution, unseal a given Takara unit, and then we have access to all those secrets. So again, this isn't ready for prime time. This is, hey, this works, and the ball is moving in this direction. Let's see. That's the only update that I've got from a cloud perspective so far. And yeah, Peter, thank you for pulling that up on PyPy for us and putting that in the chat. So I got the ball rolling, and now I'll ask, does anybody else have any updates? Nick, I know you're not feeling too hot, but you're a trooper and you showed up. Any updates on your end?
Yeah, so regarding the initial Azure item provider, I haven't really been able to make too much progress on that because of the holidays, Thanksgiving and things like that, but I'm looking to try and get back into shoring that up a little bit more. Part of that, right now there's no contract with that provider. And I know when I was at SaltConf, I had talked with both you, Tom, and Tyler about getting a contract that made sense into that. So I'll probably grab Tyler at some point and see if we can get that put in at some point. Sorry if I'm rambling. It's yeah, just so we can have something to base other providers off of. Also at SaltConf, Adam Greenfield brought up that he wanted to take a stab at looking at the AWS stuff. I'm I'm not sure if he had joined up. I didn't see him initially, but I think he's on Slack. So if anybody's interested in getting involved in that, I think he was the guy that wanted to take charge. I'm not sure if he's been able to make any progress on it yet, but that's really the next step, right? Is to get more providers for items so that we can see kind of what it's going to look like, and it'll really start to take shape at that point. Let's see. And then the only other thing was, Tyler, do you want to chime in about your cloud PR spreadsheet, moving things to master?
Yeah. A while ago, we posted in the Slack, there's a whole bunch of cloud PRs that we want to port to master. We have a couple of them right now. The hard part is we need tests to be able to merge the new, to port PRs from develop into master. And so if there's something that wasn't developed that you want in master, we really could use some help getting tests written for these PRs and getting them in. And I'll repost the spreadsheet in just a sec in the Slack.
I don't know that, excuse me, I don't know if this is the best use of everyone's time, but could we put a parking lot item? I missed a number of meetings because of travel and just bad timing on my part. And so the shift in leadership in the group and also the shift to focusing on item is something that I'm really could use an explanation for. I also couldn't make it to SaltConf this year. So I really appreciate some, like when I looked up what item was, it really didn't jump out to me exactly what's going on. So is there anyone who's got a pointer to what the roadmap and the plans are, and maybe a little bit of the why and the next steps here? Again, this is totally parking lot-ish. I just don't want to lose it or wrap up without that in mind.
I think I know we're a little bit behind on posting the working group sessions, but I believe that the first introduction to item might have been posted. Have you had a chance to take a look at that yet?
Honestly, no. I was looking at I was looking more towards the actual repo for item and maybe trying to figure out, because there was the Cumulus stuff that was originally the target, and I guess we shifted off of that, and so I don't understand how that how clearly there's a better option now. I don't understand what the argument was for it, and so I want to see how we're moving the original targets into the new targets.
So, yeah, so I can cover that. If we go back a few months, we had a bit of a rocky start in general with the working group, and then Daniel Wallace decided to resign as working group leader. The projects that he was pushing seemed to have been pulled. He seemed to pull back from them, and so I came in, and Nick graciously agreed to fill that leadership role. I sat down with Nick, and we discussed a number of options. Among those options were to, one of the big questions that we've got is that we generally have an agreement that we think it makes a lot of sense to have Salt Cloud function as more of a standalone unit. And I had been working on a piece called Item, where Item is basically the Salt state system, but it's been pulled out of Salt, put to Python 3, async IO enabled, and a number of features added and compartmentalized so that it's a lot easier to continue to, making bigger development with. And so when you look at Item, the idea behind Item again is that it's just the language runtime for being able to have idempotent, declarative yet imperatively executed routines. And I put Item together from the intention of saying, let's, instead of looking at this from the perspective of like the SALT project, where we end up trying to pull everything in, I think think it's better to be able to look at it from the perspective of saying that if we're going to support a new interface, then the support for any interface that we add should be built in its own repo, tested by itself, instead of running into the monolith problems we haven't solved. And so I presented that to the working group a few months ago, and went over that with Nick, and we had a pretty positive feedback saying, yes, let's try this out. Now, with that said, we're still, of course, working on Salt Cloud inside of Salt, certainly not being abandoned by any stretch, but at the same time trying to say, is there a way that we can take things to the next step? And so in doing so, we sat down and said, look, if we want to move things over to allowing us to have Salt Cloud be more standalone, the item approach makes a lot of sense. And so we can create parallel projects that express things like Azure support or AWS support, or even pieces of AWS support, in such a way that makes them much easier to develop and maintain from a pluggable perspective. So Nick graciously decided to take on the task of getting Azure moved over, and has made significant progress. Excuse me, and has made significant progress there. Personally, when I got the commitment back that others would be willing to help round out the actual cloud providers, my response was, okay, then I can work on making that core platform more powerful. And so I spent a fair amount of time getting ITEM up to speed, adding a number of features, a few things that are fairly, let's just say they're things that Salt can't do from a config management perspective. So ITEM is already beginning to diverge there, but things that are more targeted towards being able to handle some of the unique problems that we run into with cloud and API management in general. And so subsequently, we were able to announce that we had made significant progress with ITEM and cloud support back at SaltConf. There was a training there, and much of that training material is inside of the documentation for ITEM and POP, ITEM being built on top of POP, the plugin-oriented programming system that I put together, really with an attempt to build these sorts of things. And so where we are today is just that there are a few caveats, a few things that need to be filled in from a system perspective so that we're able to better support the use case. And one of those, of course, is encrypted secret store, making sure that's embedded and really easy to use. So that's really the quick overview. Now with that, Nick has graciously posted the reference to a video where I went over these concepts in a little more detail in a previous working group. But I certainly understand that things still feel a little muddy. One of the things that we need to do from a task perspective is that we're getting very close to having at least enough of the foundational pieces in place that we can start putting together what a high-level view of this project actually looks like, right? So that we can have some documentation around the cloud effort, some introductory documentation that makes it very easy to come in and say, hey, here's how you use this new thing to manage cloud. The upshot is that for adding support for more clouds, for the most part, we can pretty easily port support for interfaces directly from Salt into repositories that support ITEM. And so that's kind of the overview of what's happened over the last few months.
So I guess at this point, like you said, the only provider there is the work that's being done for Azure. Does that, so some of the goals that were talked about earlier that I think would still be there are things like not having to put in. So the AWS provider in the current cloud environment is probably the most complete, I guess. I mean, I use it all the time. I've only found a few gaps. And so to port it over, I mean, one of the goals was to stop relying on, a built-in client and start using things like Boto 3, start being able to construct it. And what I'm seeing of POP and POP specifically is that it's oriented towards you know, putting in the pieces you need. So I guess my question is, like, again, I'm just trying to orient myself here. I've got no problem with any of this. And I hope I'm not coming off that way. I'm just trying to figure out, like, what's at the expected time frame to when we could when potentially I could contribute or work on something here. Because my first thought is, well, you know, I'm probably at a typical company that's a long-term user of Salt, which is we still haven't gotten to Python 3, let alone upgrading Salt to using Python 3, because we have to go through all of the stuff we've written. And we're now adding a different methodology of dealing with our cloud, because this will be the way, I guess, or potentially the way, or at least something that we could evaluate. And so what's the intention for bringing installations up to parity with what we currently have? Like, what's the expected time frame? I'm not asking for commitments. I'm just like asking, like, how do we get there?
Oh yeah. So like you're saying, the AWS support is pretty robust at this point inside of Salt, but yeah, there's a lot of motivation to move things to more modern libraries. And when it comes to Python 3, again, like you're saying, we've got the problem of needing to port things over to Python 3 in large part because Python 2 is kind of going the way of the dodo. We've got a couple of weeks left.
You've made the commitment to not use 2, so it seems like that's well on its way.
Right. And I mean, to be honest, it goes right back into, it's already become very difficult to support major projects on 2, since all of the libraries that we depend on are basically not being maintained anymore. I shouldn't say all, 95%. It's been quite the exodus and quite a challenge to deal with. So one of the solutions here that we're targeting to make that migration easier is that, and so this is actually something else I can talk about. And here I've made a bit of progress here. I'm not ready to present on it, but it's worth mentioning. There's a project out there called Salt Bin now. The idea here is that there are a number of platforms that it is difficult to have to deploy and maintain a full Python stack on, right, for Python 3. And it would be easier if we could install a more simplified version of Salt anyway, so that we don't have to have all the dependency management, et cetera, as an option. And so I created Salt Bin, which is a way to compile single binary versions of Salt, which ship with Python, which makes it a lot easier to be able to deploy deploy Salt without having to install Python 3 on the target system. And there are binaries up there right now which are built on CentOS 6 using Python 3.7 as an initial reference. With that, POP also ships with its own build scripts, so that when you make a POP project like item, you can run a command and have everything bundled into one nice little binary, which makes it, again, a lot easier to port, a lot easier to deal with that whole, hey, what version of Python do I have to be on problem? And so that's definitely a problem that we see and have seen for a while. A project I'm going to be announcing here, I mean, give me a few more weeks. But another piece I'm going to be announcing as part of kind of this next generation puzzle is I've taken the Salt Bin binary builder and the POP builder and merged them together into one project, making it just a lot easier to build these single binaries with Python inside of them. So there's that. The next question is timeline. I would say that these projects are still early stage enough that that's hard to tell. Now, from a contribution perspective and from a port over perspective, any help that we could get there, of course, is appreciated, especially from an AWS perspective. The libraries that are used by POP are very, very, very similar to what's in Salt. You only need to make a few changes, and in the item documentation, we've got a document that goes over what those changes actually look like, as well as how to stand up support for a specific cloud. And so one of the things that we do need right now is somebody to step up and say, hey, I can see how Azure looks. I'm willing to start working on getting a repository for Amazon support. If that person wants to reach out to me, I'd be more than happy to walk them through whatever they need to get that ball rolling. But we're definitely in a position where that can happen and that can work. Once we get, so there's a couple more pieces that we need. Actually, there aren't a whole lot more pieces that we need to make this thing as smooth as I want it to be. And so the big piece that we needed to make this thing a little more smooth was to get this secret store in place. Beyond that, I've already made a number of additions to item to make this thing functional. Beyond that, I want to make it so that Salt can easily call out to item in these sorts of interfaces, so that it's really easy for us to say that during that migration, everything can either be run standalone with these new pieces, or also run seamlessly inside of Salt. Nick Garber's got a question. I'm a little unclear on how and when POP will be introduced into a Salt release. So POP is a next generation version of the Salt loader. And the problem that we run into with POP from a Salt loader perspective is that it has diverged functionally. So there's a fair amount of question about when and how that can be put into Salt. A lot of what I want to do at this point is make sure that we can get some of these other projects up and off the ground before we look back at retrofitting things into Salt. So we don't have a finite date when we're going to be migrating everything POP into Salt. Now, the best way to do that would be to do it piecemeal. Would be to come back and say what instances of the Salt loader can be replaced with POP in an easy and straightforward way. Because there is a little bit of module porting that needs to happen. And at the end of the day, the challenge that I've got here is that I don't want to do any rug pulling on people with Salt, right? I don't want to do anything that changes your workflow in Salt. I don't want to interrupt Salt's development processes. But I do want to be able to present some next generation tools, and that as they mature, hopefully they can solve problems that we run into inside of Salt. And so I guess what I'm saying is I don't want to be shoving stuff directly into Salt prematurely. Does that answer your question, Nick?
Hi, is the audio coming through?
Yeah.
Okay, great. So, yeah, I know it's early days for a lot of this stuff, but part of what I'm wondering is, like, what do you consider the best case scenario? So, for example, would you expect the current functionality to be exposed through POP, or would you expect both systems to be available in parallel, like through a dispatch? Will there be some release that supports POP and not the old loader style? What do you expect in terms of the way that these paths merge together?
Okay. To be honest, that's a tricky question. So really it boils down to how we want to kind of carve everything out. If we come back and we look at Salt Cloud, for instance, item is meant to replace the state system. If we wanted to move Salt states and the execution modules all over to Salt, I mean, there's over 700 execution modules. It's a bit of a lift. And so when I look at this, I think of it more along the lines of being able to, how do I say this? I don't want to say rewrite Salt, because it makes more sense to be able to take the functionality that's inside of Salt and migrate it to a new platform, at least in my mind right now, than it does to retrofit. But I feel that it's too early to make that particular commitment. When it comes to making these things available through SALT, I don't see any problems with us looking at the sodium or magnesium release of SALT to be able to call out to these interfaces. The existing interfaces inside of SALT would still be there, but it would be along the lines of being able to say that the new work that we've got in POP is made available to a minion, right? That is not something that's very difficult to do. So, sorry, I guess, Nick, I don't feel super prepared to answer that question very cleanly.
That is the highest praise I've gotten so far today.
I hope your day improves.
Well, maybe a slimmed down version of the question is: do you expect that both systems, like, because you mentioned the case of the minion, do you expect that both would be available simultaneously at some point in the release process? Both the current salt loader and the POP system, like sort of sibling systems.
Yeah. So how do I put this? Yes, I think it would make a ton of sense if. Sorry, just give me a second to collect my thoughts on this. I mean, I've thought about this. I've written this down. It's too early. Okay. The optimal situation is that, let's assume that the cloud support continues forward in earnest, and we are able to port Salt Cloud into ITEM and make it standalone. At that point, we would be able to logically no longer need to support Salt Cloud and directly inside of Salt, but we would still want it to be accessible via all the same interfaces. And so in that scenario, what we look at is having a deployment of Salt, which is able to execute everything through ITEM and POP interfaces, right? This should not be a difficult thing to add. Salt already has all of the pluggable layers and redirects that, that one could possibly need to be able to make sure that these paths were still relevant inside of its own execution engines. And so in that case, we would be looking at a sibling scenario. And then over time, we'd be able to look at things and begin to ask the question, are there components that we feel should be migrated over into this POP ecosystem? And so, yes, I'm going to say that I think it would be optimal if POP and the Salt Loader were sibling systems for a while, abstracting different interfaces as we look at a long-term migration. Does that better answer your question?
Yeah, fully and completely. Thank you.
Okay, excellent. Okay. Any other questions, comments, arguments, or rebuttals? Rotten fruit, perhaps?
I've got one for Cassandra. So our last working group meeting, we did a demo of the Azure stuff. When do you know when that's going to be posted, or is that a question for somebody else? And I guess the question is, you know, what's the usual lead time for getting those posted up there?
Okay, for the working group video lead time. I'm not sure how quickly they are being posted, but I can find out for you and let you know.
Awesome, thanks.
Cassandra, I don't actually know who's posting them, to be perfectly honest.
I mean, it seems like something I could do, and I'm going to be in most of them.
Yeah, I mostly asked Cassandra because I saw she was announcing it on Slack, so I figured maybe she was tied into who was doing that.
So we did just transition from Kavya to Cassandra, and it makes me wonder if perhaps Kavya was doing that before, and it was just one of the balls dropped in the transition. Cassandra's been fantastic. She's picked up many things. So
Thank you.
I would certainly not. I would certainly not issue any blame if something was missed. So that might be it. But yeah, Cassandra, let's double check on that and make sure that we know who needs to be getting those up.
Okay. Yeah, and anytime anybody needs something specific, let me know and I'll try to track that down for you too. Just DM me.
All right. Nick, do you have anything else for us?
Just to thank you for dealing with my voice today.
You sound great. All right.
May I ask one more question then before we jump off, which is,
Uh-huh.
are there any tasks, and I'm not going to offer very much time given the holiday season, but are there any tasks that need to be done or that need to be reviewed right now that we could distribute maybe via Slack, but just things that we should expect someone to say, hey, can anyone help me with this? Or maybe, I don't know. I don't know who's doing the lion's share of the work aside from the Azure, or if there's any work outside of Azure, because I can't help with that. But I'm curious as to whether there is anything to be helped right now, I guess.
So it sounds like really what we need is somebody to just kick this thing off for AWS. I imagine that people have looked at it and it probably feels pretty daunting. And I don't think it's anywhere near as daunting as it appears. And so, Nick, I'll of course let you get feeling better, but if you've got a moment and can reach out to me here in the next week or so, once you're feeling a little better. And I think it would make sense at this point for us to kind of regroup and chat for a moment and just see what it'll look like for us to get a repo started with AWS support, so that it's very apparent for someone to hop on board.
Yeah, definitely. And I'll reach out to Adam prior to talking to you to see if he's done any recon on it in the few weeks that we've had since SaltConf.
Okay.
Yeah, do me a favor. Just, I mean, if you could let me know, I've got a decently sized AWS infrastructure, so testing things is fairly easy for me to take a run at.
Definitely.
And I think the contracts that me and Nick are going to work on will help with that too. Maybe we can make documents how to make a new cloud on top of POP, so that it's easy for anyone to jump in and do it.
That would be helpful.
Yeah, I do think that would be really helpful. I think that the other thing that I'd like to sit down with, it might actually merit going over in another one of these meetings, is I did add transparent requisites to item. Now, the idea behind transparent requisites is that the author of the actual state modules, the Python files there, can define that if another state exists, then it will be transparently required behind the scenes, right? Which makes automatic ordering of those systems really seamless. I'd really like to sit down with a few folks and go over a few scenarios to see what support I need to add there, but also so that we can get that into these clouds, so that it's just a lot easier for somebody to make something that's always going to run in the right order no matter what, right? All right. So I guess that's the only other thing I've got. But yeah, it sounds like we've got a few plans here that we can execute on. And Peter, you showing up and your with the timing and the questions you've asked has been absolutely fantastic. And it's helped us raise a few issues around how we can improve what we're doing. So that's excellent. Thank you.
All right, thanks. Yeah.
Okay. So are we good to go? We done?
Just while I was speaking about providers, I would want to propose to drop delivered provider while moving to item. I'm not sure it really makes sense to keep it in the new things. And since we're already having dupes with the Vert modules and states, I'd like to propose to leave that one aside, at least in the next steps.
So one of the nice things about this is when we create support for new clouds using ITEM, they don't actually have to go into ITEM's code base, which means that if somebody does decide to make a libvirt module, it doesn't have to be a thing. So, but yeah, with that said, it certainly isn't a priority on my list.
Yeah, just I think it's a good opportunity to filter out all the cloud providers we have and only move over the really relevant ones, at least in the first step.
Okay. No, and you're right in that we should be able to look at these things and come at them with a different approach than a lot of the work that we did initially. I mean, it's worth noting that certain interfaces inside of Salt Cloud were made when clouds in general were a lot simpler than they are today. But yeah, definitely we need to think about things from the perspective of filtering and refining. Thank you, Cedric.
And at least it confirms me, because I was feeling kind of guilty of not taking care of the libvirt cloud provider and only focusing on the libvirt modules and states, but at least now I'm not guilty anymore.
Oh yeah. So wait, Cedric, are you the one working on libvirt modules and states?
Yep.
So from an ITEM perspective, it's all about the modules and states.
Yes.
So yeah, I mean, assuming if we do want to do a migration of libvirt, which you would be more than welcome to take on. The Salt Cloud. So when we look at migrating things from Salt Cloud to ITEM, 90-some-odd% of that work is taking the execution modules and states and just porting them over. And that work is pretty straightforward. You mostly just need to change it so that instead of referencing Dunder Salt, you reference hub.exec because everything's on a hub now inside of POP. And there's a great doc on how to do that. And then the functionality that you get inside of the provider, the Salt Cloud provider, also just becomes a state. So it sounds like we're on the same page with macro goals anyway. So that's good to hear.
So you mean that I could start moving the states and modules from Vert onto an ITEM enable stuff?
Yep, that's the idea.
I'll really definitely need to look into that.
I just threw a link to a commit that I did just as a proof of concept in the differences that I had in one of the states to move it over to ITEM. That might be helpful for you.
Okay, thank you.
You know what I think that we should do, Nick? Let's plan this. And maybe this is what we should just do for the next cloud working group, Nick. Let's just plan on a class let's make a video tutorial on how to do this. How's that sound?
Sounds good to me.
All right. So yeah, Nick and I will sync up again when you're feeling better. No worry. Nick and I will sync up, and we'll put together a training on how to migrate these things over, and we will present it either in the next working group, or Nick and I might just make a video if we get it done sooner, and make that available to everybody. So, does that sound all right, Nick?
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, that will almost certainly get this ball rolling. Okay. I feel awkward when we have these meetings and I think everything's done. And so I propose that everything can be done. And then it goes for another 15 minutes. And I think, oh, that was premature of me. Does anybody have anything else?
Yeah, we could probably use some discipline here in putting agenda items. I'm sorry, I jumped into that first. I think other people are using the chat more effectively, but that's probably a good way to approach it, is sort of if we don't come in with an agenda, which I think maybe would be helpful if we just try to create one so that you can see what's actually there.
Yeah, no, I think that would make a lot of sense. How do I put this?
So I'll take the hit for that one. That was sort of my violating the etiquette.
Well, I don't think any of us had an agenda together. Nick is understandably sick. I've been traveling nonstop for 2 weeks. But yeah, we should we should have agendas for these. It would also make sense if we were able to collect questions that we would like to discuss. So when we're going over things in Slack, it would make sense if people are able to submit, hey, I'd like to go over XYZ in a working group meeting. Then we'd be able to be a little more prepared as well.
Yeah, something I do internally. Yeah, something I do internally for some of the meetings we have where I'm working is sometimes just for the channel for that, throw up a weekly pinned item leading up to it and let people throw their suggestions in there. You can discuss them offline, put them on and off, but it creates it in Slack so that it's not, you can look it up later to the extent that a free Slack is able to keep it looked up, pinned items stick around, but you kind of want to groom them after a while. But it does make it easy to find. Maybe that's a one way to get an agenda built without having to have someone running around and chasing people.
That's a good idea. Also, if we ever want to take things outside of, or go more in depth on some of these working group items, we've recently implemented this open hour concept where people can submit kind of topics and questions, and we can dive into those things a little bit more in depth as well if it becomes something we want to talk about more than once a month. We just need somebody, as far as kind of a pinned item together topics, we just need somebody to take care of doing that on a weekly basis. And I don't know if that should be me or if it should be one of you all. So let me know your thoughts.
I can put something up there. And should it be weekly, or or would it really just be something that we would do prior to the monthly meeting?
Maybe like a week before the monthly meeting.
Yeah. Okay.
Cool, thank you. And who was that said that? Was that Nick?
Nick said he
was,
would do it.
Yeah, gravelly voice Nick.
Okay. Thanks.
Yeah, Nick's trying out for the next Batman movie.
Okay, so is there time for an idle question here?
Sure.
Okay, it's Vernon Cole. I need to do add a feature to the Vagrant cloud service. Should I be doing that in the old way, or should I be looking to port the thing over for a start?
So in the what service?
Vagrant.
Oh, Vagrant. Either way, honestly. Now, I mean, it might make sense to.
When you say need, do you mean you need this feature to be working now for you, and do you have existing infrastructure, or do you mean you need to see it happen at some point?
I need it fairly soon.
So yeah, Vernon, it would. So yeah, Vernon. Either way makes sense. If you want to move your process over that way, then it would make sense for you to help with porting the Vagrant support over item. I think that would be fantastic. and it would be certainly welcome. But at the same time, if there's a feature that you need to toss into Salt's Vagrant support, toss that feature into Salt's Vagrant support.
Okay, well, I'll look at the code and see if I can do it. Ideally, I guess both ways, huh?
Okay, sounds good.
All right, thank you.
All right, any other questions, or we can wrap up the open question portion of this, and we can be good for the next time. And we've got a lot on track as to what we can do to help get a few of these balls rolling.
I'm sorry, I do have one more question. So we have working groups for all these different like major areas of SALT. Is there anything like working group for like what I might sometimes call future tech, which you've enumerated as like POP, Heist, Umbra, these other things. It seems like we spend a certain amount of time just catching up on these things and figuring out sort of how to triangulate. Maybe they should have their own working group.
Frankly, I think that'd be great. It's been interesting with working groups in general that some of them have taken off and done really well. Some have been a little slow. The SSH working group, for instance, doesn't have quite the same traction and involvement as this one, as an example. But with that said, I think it would make sense to be able to come back and just have a way to track a bunch of the new things that I'm trying to throw at the fan as fast as I can here.
I made a note of that. I'm keeping a list of suggested work groups that I can't say we're going to implement them all right away, but keeping track of where there might be interest, and we can eventually get those in place.
Okay. Fantastic.
Thank you. That sounds like last call to me.
Sounds good. We're about out of time anyway.
I got nothing else.
Oh, sorry. Was there another one?
No, I said I got nothing else. I was just
okay.
clearing that off.
All right, I'm going to call it then. We're done. Adios.
Bye, everyone.
See you all next time.
Good weekend,
Thanks,
everyone.
everybody.
Hasta potato.
Okay, I'm out. Bye.
Bye.
Bye all.